The Boy Scouts on Lost Trail by Thornton W. Burgess. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Keith Salis. Introduction. Those who have read The Boy Scouts of Woodcraft Camp, the first book in this series, will need no introduction to most of the characters of the present volume. 4 of them are members of Dr. Merriam's famous vacation school in the deep woods, a camp conducted under Boy Scout law, but with tribes instead of patrols, each tribe having as chief a scout of the first class. 3 of them were principal characters in the second volume, The Boy Scouts on Swift River. On that trip they made practical use of the things they had learned at Woodcraft Camp, and their experiences further fitted them for the severer tests, such as are necessarily entailed by an overland trip through the wilderness, such a trip as in this volume they take in their search for Lost Trail. Every boy with good red blood in his veins is heir apparent to love of adventure. It is his birthright. In the preceding volumes, and in this, I have endeavored to show how nature is ever ready to gratify this. She has seized upon it as one of the most powerful factors in the development of courage, self-reliance, and true manliness. The great woods, the mountains, the lakes, and rivers are her classrooms, and those who seek knowledge there cannot but gain physical and moral strength. In the Boy Scouts of Woodcraft Camp, and in the Boy Scouts in a Trapper's Camp, I tried to portray my idea of what a summer camp for boys should be. In the Boy Scouts on Swift River, I drew from my own experience to show what average boys may find today of wholesome excitement, of clean living, and of daily tests in moral and physical stamina by being thrown on their own resources in a vacation spent canoeing on a wilderness stream. In the present volume, the tests of woodcraft and self-dependence are a little more severe, but only such as might reasonably be encountered on such a trip. There is none that Boy Scouts of the first class could not successfully meet. The forests and the waters call. Dead campfires wait to be rekindled. Adventure lies along the trail. Seek them, O boy reader, and know the joy of true living. The Author. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Blow. Hello, Hal. You look as if you've been invited to your own funeral. What's up, old scout? No bad news from home, is there? Hal Harrison flung his hat on the ground with a savage gesture and then dropped down beside Walter Upton, who lay sprawled out at full length on a pile of sweet-smelling balsam boughs, in a little lean-to they had built in a favorite place on the edge of a setback 1/4 of a mile from Woodcraft Camp. A scowl darkened the handsome face, and he bit his under lip in the petulant way which had been characteristic of him when he had first entered the camp 3 years before. Then a spoiled boy who all his life had been given his own way. "It's a funeral, all right," he growled. "But it's yours as much as it is mine. Hang it all, it's beastly. That's what it is, beastly." Upton had keenly watched the flushed face from his companion as he spoke, and had seen nothing of sorrow there, only anger and disappointment. So he made up his mind that whatever the news Hal received, it was nothing really serious. Probably some cherished plan of Hal's for winning points for the Senecas in the annual field day, now less than 2 weeks off, had fallen through. Hal was given to occasionally flying off the handle over little things of this kind, and it always amused Walter, especially when it had anything to do with winning points for the tribes, for he was a Delaware himself, although Harrison's chum. "Well," he said, yawning ostensibly as Hal continued to frown and bite his lip, "I'm waiting to be properly mournful and order the flowers. When does it come off?" "That's the trouble. It doesn't come off. Oh, it's beastly," replied Hal, kicking at an unoffending stick. "Say, you black-headed thundercloud, I don't like your choice of words, and I don't like conundrums. Never could guess 'em, and I don't want to try. Now, spit it out. What doesn't come off? The funeral?" retorted Walter. "No, our trip to the Maine woods," replied Hal glumly. "What? Say that again." Walter had come up to a sitting position with an abruptness that made Hal smile in spite of himself. I said that our trip to the Maine woods doesn't come off. It's fallen through. Knocked on the head, dead, buried. Is that perfectly clear?" Hal spoke slowly and with bitter emphasis. "Clear as mud," replied Walter. "Why doesn't it come off? Why is it dead? Who knocked it on the head? Quit biting your lip and limber up that tongue of yours before I pull it out by the roots." For answer, Hal took a letter from his pocket and passed it to Upton. With fingers that fairly shook, Walter spread it open. It was dated at a distant lumber camp in the Adirondacks and was as follows. "Dear Hal, just a brief and hurried note to break the bad news to you. It'll be quite out of the question for me to leave here in time to take that Maine trip we have thought about and planned for so long. I know just how keenly disappointed you and Upton will be, and I am quite as much disappointed myself. You know me well enough, I think, to know that I would not willingly upset your plans. The fact is that I have just been assigned to make some special investigations which will keep me here well into October, and you know a good scout never questions orders. Incidentally, if I make good on this work, it will mean much to me in the next year's work at college in my chosen profession. With best regards to Upton and yourself, and a very lively hope that another year we may be able to make the Maine trip together, I am always your brother scout, Louis Woodhull." Walter emitted a long whistle as he finished reading, and looked up at Hal with such a blank expression that the latter couldn't restrain a feeble grin. "Well," he demanded, "how about the funeral now? You've got a face long enough for a chief mourner, anyway. Did you ever hear of such luck? Here we've been planning for this trip a whole year, and right at the last minute Louis has to dump the fat in the fire and isn't even on hand to see it smoke. Confound his special work. I'd like to... There was a little man who had a little pan and beat it with a stick to make a din, din, din. He stubbed his little toe, and this is all I know about the little man and a piece of tin, tin, tin. May I join this cheerful party? Of course, as a good scout, I'm obliged to remind you that one of the first essentials and chief virtues in a scout is cheerfulness, and that it is his duty to be a sunshine maker in the world. You'll find it on page 9 of the manual. So here I am to cheer and be cheered, and so much obliged to you for the enthusiastic reception which you have been kind enough to give an humble citizen working in the same cause that we hold so dear to our stomachs, without which life would be so incomplete. Say, fellows, what do you got to eat? You may pass it around after I have sung my famous solo. There was a little man who had a little pan and beat it with a... The song ended abruptly, and the singer landed with a crash on the balsam bed of the lean-to as his feet were pulled from under him. Through all his impromptu speech, his face had worn the most lugubrious expression imaginable, and now there wasn't a shadow of a smile as he looked mournfully up at the two faces which, despite all their efforts, were forced to grin as they looked down on him. "Say, fellers, ain't I the bully little sunshine maker?" he persisted in a voice quite in keeping with the mournfulness of his face. "I fear I've overdone it, for I feel as if I had had a sunstroke. I must make a memorandum of that. No good scout will make too much sunshine at once. It's dangerous. Got anything to eat?" "Gag him, Walt, while I hold him," cried Hal, falling on the prone figure. There was a short, sharp struggle, in the midst of which one of the supporting posts of the lean-to was knocked out of place, bringing a corner of the roof down on the combatants. From under the wreck presently crawled the cause of the disaster, while Hal and Walter continued to struggle, each mistaking the other for their would-be victim. He watched them for a minute, and then, brushing hemlock needles from his hair, began his song right where it had been so abruptly cut off. "A stick to make a din, din, din. He stubs his little toe, and that is all I know about the little man and his piece of tin, tin, tin." At the first note, the struggle under the wrecked lean-to ceased, and Hal and Walt crept forth, grinning sheepishly. "You win, Spud," cried Walter. "You're the boss little sunshine maker of Woodcraft Camp, and you were sure needed just now. Come, help us fix this lean-to, and we'll tell you our little tale of woe." The solemn youth looked at them suspiciously. "Have you got anything to eat?" he demanded. "I never could listen to a sorrowful tale on an empty stomach. I always weep better with them that weep, and rejoice better with them that do rejoice, if my stomach's full. A full stomach expandeth the heart, while an empty stomach depresseth the liver. Hal held up a small box of ginger wafers, the seal still unbroken, which had been brought from the general store at Upper Chain on the same boat that brought the letter from Woodhull. "Mess will be served immediately after camp has been restored to order," he said soberly. "But it will be served only to those who have earned it," he added as an afterthought. "'Tis well, most noble captain, and I have the honor to report for service," replied Spud, striking an attitude borrowed from some old theatrical print. "Come on, then," retorted Walt. "Only those who help me will help themselves to my grub, and those cookies happen to be mine." A few minutes of active work on the part of the three boys served to restore order, and then, with the box of cookies between them, they lounged comfortably on the balsam bed. "Now fire ahead and put me wise to the particular reason for this gloom party," commanded Spud with a cookie in his capacious mouth and one in each hand. "Well, you know what our plans were for the first 2 weeks in September after the close of camp," began Walter. Spud nodded. "If I don't, it isn't for lack of hearing about them. That trip into the Maine woods is all you fellows have talked about for the last month," he mumbled. "I'm not wishing you any hard luck, but if something happens to—" "Don't say it," Walter implored. "Don't wish us anything until you have read that letter." He thrust Woodhull's note out to Spud, who accepted it as if he thought he might be the butt of some joke. A hasty reading of the contents, however, relieved his mind of all suspicions, and in an instant he realized how great was the disappointment of his two friends. "Oh, I say, this is a ghastly shame. If I'd known you were up against any such chunk of gloom as this, I wouldn't have come fooling around the way I did," he blurted out. "Why, I've sat around on my hunkers listening to you fellers talking about that trip until I was that envious that I didn't dare look in the glass for fear I'd find myself turning green. And now at the very last to have your plans knocked out this way. Why, it's a crime, that's what it is." Hal smiled in sour fashion. "Do you like that any better than beastly, Walt?" he asked. "Not much," replied Upton. "It's neither a crime nor beastly, but just hard luck. I confess that Lewis's letter was pretty near a knockout at first, but our little sunshine maker here—" Walter smote Spud a mighty blow on the chest just as that young gentleman started to swallow a mouthful of cookie, with the result that half went down the wrong way, "has quite revived me, and now I'll do as much for him." Thereupon he fell upon Spud and pounded him on the back and poured water down his throat faster than he could swallow, until, red in the face and gasping, his victim lay back and feebly shook his head as Hal offered him another cookie. "Have you broken the news to Sister yet?" Walter inquired when order was once more restored. Hal shook his head. "No," said he. "I came straight here as soon as I got the letter. Poor kid. I believe he'll be fully as much disappointed as we are. That reminds me, what did you chaps do to the youngster on Swift River last year?" Spud broke in. "Why, last summer, up to the time you fellows took him into the woods, he was afraid of his own shadow, scared to death of the water, and a regular baby about the dark. This year he's one of the nerviest youngsters in camp and one of the most likable. I wasn't a bit surprised when I heard that he was to be the 4th member of that Maine hunting party, but however you came to take him on that Swift River cruise last year has been a puzzle I never could solve." "You didn't see the real boy last year, and this year you do, that's all," replied Walter. "We didn't either until mighty near the end of that cruise, but Lewis Woodhull did, and that is how Sister happened to go along. We'll tell you about it sometime. Speaking of angels," Walter pointed along the trail from the direction of the camp. A boy of 14, rather slight in build but wiry and with well-knit muscles, was advancing toward the lean-to. It was Edward Plimpton, dubbed Sister in derision the year before, and called Sister now as a term of affection by his intimate friends, chief of whom were Upton and Harrison. "Hurry up and take your place with the others on the chief mourner's bench," called Spud. "I'm not one of them myself, but sort of a first assistant. Now, Walt, break it gently. Our trip's off, Sister. Whole thing's gone up like the smoke of last year's campfires," said Walter. "What's that?" demanded Sister, surprise, consternation, and unbelief struggling for mastery in his face. There, there, said Spud soothingly, fanning Sister with his hat. Walter is a savage, and his frankness is fairly brutal, though picturesque, especially that about last year's smoke. He should have left it to me to break the news. The fact is, my son, the Maine woods is too small a place for you this year. The guides won't want you. The moose have sent word that they won't show themselves to you, and the deer all threaten to go on strike. In short, you're not going to the Maine woods this year. That's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Plimpton gave the others such a look of perplexed entreaty that Walt took pity on him and passed him the letter which had so dashed their hopes. Well, said Walter as Plimpton laid the letter down with a comical expression of dismay. Where are we going? Inquired Plimpton in a tone that implied that he took it for granted that they were going somewhere. Where are we going? Why, you freckle-nosed tenderfoot, we're not going anywhere. It's all off. Haven't you got that through your head yet? Howled Hal, whose temper was beginning to boil again at further realization of the complete miscarriage of their plans. Oh, of course it's all off so far as Maine is concerned, and I'm mighty sorry, and a whole lot disappointed, said Plimpton. But of course you've planned some other trip to take its place. Let's have it. Hal and Walter stared at him stupidly. He spoke in such a matter-of-fact, of course it's all settled air that instinctively each began to wonder if he really hadn't been subconsciously thinking of some such thing himself. I'm afraid we haven't had time to make any plans yet, replied Walter hesitatingly. You see, we got the news only half an hour ago, and we've hardly sensed it yet. I'll bet Sister's got a little plan all worked out, ticketed and ready for delivery, interrupted Spud, who had shrewdly been watching the youngster's face. Let's have it, Sister, only bear in mind that if it meets with your Uncle Spud's approval, he's got to be counted in on it. Now undo your little prize package, and let's have a look at it. Plimpton flushed. You see, he began slowly, I had thought of the possibility of this falling through. Not that I thought it was going to, or had any suspicions that it might, but every once in a while thought, supposing it should, would come into my mind. Then I would get to wondering what we might do in place of it, and so I got to turning over different plans and working them out. Then one day I just happened to hear Big Jim and one of the other guides talking about Lost Trail and Smuggler's Hollow, and a thought popped into my head what a bully trip it would be to try and follow this old trail. So I made a lot of inquiries and read up a lot about it in some books in Dr. Merriam's library, and the more I read, the better the idea of a hike up through the mountains along the supposed line of this old trail struck me. You fellows, that is, Walt and Hal, have had 2 canoe trips, and I've had 1. Why not a 2 weeks hike through the wilderness for a change? I think it would be great fun to hunt for that old trail, for they say it is really lost, and it's got a mighty interesting history. It used to be used by the Hurons when they made raids from Canada down to this country. If we can get the consent of Dr. Merriam and the folks at home, why not have a try at following the old trail and trying to work it out? Listen's good to me, son. And you've got to count me in if you try it, said Spud. What do you say, Walt? Looks to me like Sister will make a better scout than any of us if he keeps on. He's put one over on you fellows this time, for he's lived up to the law of good scouting, which is to be prepared. And here he is trotting out a new plan all worked out while you fellows were doing nothing but chew gloom. Let's get together after mess tonight and see what this plan of Sister's looks like when it's analyzed. Listens to me like there's something in it. And if you fellows are as good sports and scouts as Sister, you'll forget your disappointment about the other trip and get busy on another, which will include Spud Eli, the original sunshine maker. The call for evening mess sounded just then, and it was agreed that the 4 should meet afterward, and Plimpton should go into greater details regarding his idea, and also should tell the story of Lost Trail, as he had pieced it together from history and legends. End of Chapter 1.